Alright, let me tell you about this one night that still gives me the creeps. It was just supposed to be a quick trip to a fast food joint. Nothing out of the ordinary. But man, it turned into something that makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. So, here's what went down. I was starving after a long day at work. You know how it is, right? Too tired to cook, and all you want is something greasy and quick to fill you up. So I decided to hit up this fast food place on the way home. It wasn't a big chain like McDonald's or anything, just this small local spot that stays open late. I'd been there a few times before, and it was usually pretty quiet, which I liked. That night was no different, or at least it seemed that way at first. I pulled into the parking lot around 10 p.m. There were a few cars here and there, but nothing that made me feel uneasy. I got out of my car, locked it up, and headed inside. The place had that typical fast food vibe. Bright fluorescent lights, the hum of the soda machine, and the smell of fried food hanging in the air. I walked up to the counter to place my order. The guy working the register was new though. I hadn't seen him before, which was odd because this place had a pretty regular staff. But hey, people come and go, so I didn't think much of it. He had this strange vibe though. He didn't say much, just kind of mumbled when I told him what I wanted. A cheeseburger, fries, and a Coke. Classic, right? Anyway, he punched in my order and I handed him the cash. When he gave me my change, he held onto my hand for just a second too long. It was weird, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just awkward or nervous or something. I grabbed my receipt and moved to the side to wait for my food. There were a couple of other people in there, but it was mostly empty. There was this woman sitting at a table by herself, staring at her phone. And then there was this guy in the corner. He was an older man, probably in his 50s, with a scruffy beard and this worn-out jacket. He was just sitting there, sipping on a coffee, not really paying attention to anything around him. Or so I thought. I got my food pretty quickly and found a seat near the window. I like to people watch, you know? So I picked a spot where I could see both the inside of the restaurant and the parking lot outside. I unwrapped my burger and took a big bite, just trying to relax after a long day. But then I started to get that feeling, you know, that sensation when you can just feel someone watching you. I glanced around the room, and sure enough, the old guy in the corner was staring right at me. He wasn't even trying to be subtle about it. He just sat there, eyes locked on me, not blinking, not moving, just staring. I tried to ignore it at first. I mean, maybe he was just a harmless weirdo, right? But every time I looked up, there he was, still watching. It was starting to freak me out a bit. I thought about getting up and leaving, but I was already halfway through my meal, and part of me didn't want to seem paranoid. So I just kept eating, trying to pretend like I didn't notice him. Then I realized something. The guy at the counter, the new guy who took my order, was staring too. He was leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on me just like the old man. Now this was getting really creepy. What were the odds that two people in the same place were both just staring at me like that? I could feel my heart start to race. My hands were getting clammy. I took out my phone and pretended to be busy with it, just so I wouldn't have to look up at them. I texted a friend, just some random message to distract myself. But when I glanced up again, they were still watching. And now the woman with the phone had joined in. She wasn't staring directly at me, but she kept glancing over in my direction every few seconds, like she was trying to be sneaky about it. I decided I'd had enough. I was done with my food anyway, so I gathered up my trash and headed for the exit. As I walked past the counter, the new guy smirked at me, this weird, unsettling smile that made my stomach turn. I didn't say anything, I just kept walking. I pushed the door open and stepped outside. The cool night air hit me, and I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. I glanced back through the window, and that's when I saw it. All three of them, the old man, the woman, and the guy behind the counter. They were all standing now, watching me through the glass, just standing there, side by side, staring with these blank expressions. My heart was pounding in my chest. I practically sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys. I finally got the door open, jumped in, and locked it. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. I looked back at the restaurant, and they were still there, just standing at the window, watching. I didn't waste any more time. I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the asphalt. As I drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see them following me or something. But there was nothing, just the empty road behind me. I drove straight home, my hands shaking the whole way. When I finally got back to my apartment, I locked the door and double-checked the windows. I even turned on all the lights, just to make myself feel a little safer. But that feeling of being watched, it just wouldn't go away. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept imagining those three faces staring at me through the window. I knew it sounded crazy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew where I lived, that they might come after me or something. I mean, why else would they all just stand there and stare like that? It didn't make any sense. The next day, I told a couple of friends about what happened. They just laughed it off, saying I was probably imagining things or that those people were just weirdos with nothing better to do. But I knew what I saw. I wasn't imagining it. I avoided that fast food place for a while after that. I mean, can you blame me? But then, a few weeks later, I started to think that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe my friends were right. Maybe it was just a coincidence, and I was being paranoid. So, one night I decided to go back, just to prove to myself that it was all in my head. I drove to the same place, parked in the same spot, and walked in. Everything looked normal. There were a few different people working the counter, and the place was busier than it had been that night. I felt a little relieved. Maybe it was all just a weird fluke. I ordered my food, sat down at a table, and started eating. For a while, everything was fine. No weird stares, no creepy vibes. Just a regular night at a fast food joint. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, the old man from that night. He walked in and sat down at the same corner booth. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But then I saw her, the woman with the phone. She walked in a few minutes later and sat down at a different table. She didn't even order anything. She just sat there, glancing around the room. My stomach was in knots. I couldn't believe it. What were the chances that they'd all show up again, on the same night, at the same place? I felt like I was in some kind of twisted game, but I didn't know the rules. I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my stuff and rushed out the door, not even bothering to finish my food. As I walked to my car, I kept glancing back, half expecting to see them watching me through the window again, but they didn't move this time. They just sat there, like they were waiting for something. I got into my car and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was far away from that place, my mind racing with a million questions. Who were they? Why were they doing this? And what did they want from me? I still don't have the answers, but every now and then, when I'm out in public, I catch myself looking around, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see them. Just a glimpse, a flash of that scruffy beard, or a smirk, or a woman glancing at her phone. It's enough to make my heart skip a beat, to make me feel that fear all over again. So yeah, that's my story. Maybe it was just a coincidence, or maybe I was overreacting, but all I know is I haven't set foot in that place since, and I don't think I ever will again. It was a Saturday night, and I was craving something greasy and comforting, so I decided to grab some fast food. There's this burger joint a couple of blocks away from my apartment that I usually go to when I don't feel like cooking. It's one of those places that's not a big chain, just a small family-run business that's open late. They make these amazing burgers, and I was in the mood for one of them. I got there around 9 p.m. The place was pretty empty, which was a bit odd because it's usually packed, especially on a weekend, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe everyone else was out doing something more interesting than sitting in a fast food joint on a Saturday night. The only other people there were the cashier, a young guy who looked like he was having the worst day of his life, and this woman sitting in the far corner, her back to the door. I couldn't see her face, but she was hunched over the table, staring at her food. I went up to the counter to order. The cashier barely looked at me, just grunted out a "what'll it be?" I asked for my usual, a double cheeseburger with extra pickles, fries, and a Coke. As he punched in my order, I tried to make some small talk, to lighten the mood a bit, but he just wasn't having it. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days, dark circles under his eyes, and this blank look on his face. It was kind of unsettling, to be honest. I got my receipt and took a seat near the window, far enough from the woman in the corner, but close enough to keep an eye on what was going on. I mean, you never know these days, right? People are weird. I glanced over at her a couple of times, but she didn't move, didn't even touch her food. It was like she was frozen in place, just staring at whatever was on the table in front of her. I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Something about the whole scene felt off. As I waited for my food, I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through social media, trying to distract myself. But I kept getting this feeling that I was being watched. You know that sensation when you just know someone's eyes are on you? I looked up a couple of times, half expecting to catch the woman in the corner looking at me. But every time I glanced her way, she was still staring at her food, motionless. The air in the place felt heavy, almost suffocating. I noticed that the music that usually played softly in the background was turned off. It was dead silent, except for the occasional sound of the grill sizzling from the kitchen. I could feel my anxiety starting to build up, but I kept telling myself it was all in my head. Just a quiet night, that's all. Finally, the cashier called out my number. I got up to grab my food, trying to shake off the weird vibe. As I passed by the woman, I noticed something odd. Her food looked untouched, completely cold, like it had been sitting there for hours. And then I saw her hands. They were trembling slightly, fingers twitching every now and then, but she didn't move to eat or even look up. I picked up my tray and headed back to my seat, trying not to think too much about it. I sat down and took a bite of my burger, but I couldn't really enjoy it. I kept glancing over at the woman, wondering what her deal was. Why was she just sitting there, not eating, not moving? The more I watched her, the more I noticed. She was dressed in this old, worn-out coat, way too big for her frame. Her hair was tangled and matted, like she hadn't washed it in weeks. And there was this smell, this faint sour odor that I hadn't noticed before. It was coming from her direction, and it made my stomach turn. I tried to focus on my food, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong. I glanced over at the cashier, but he was busy with something behind the counter, not paying attention to either of us. I was starting to feel trapped, like the walls were closing in on me. I wanted to get up and leave, but I didn't want to be rude, or worse, look like I was scared. So I stayed put, hoping she'd leave first, and then she moved. It was just a small movement, but it made my heart skip a beat. Her hand, which had been resting on the table, slowly started to slide towards her lap. I watched, holding my breath, as she reached into her coat pocket. I couldn't see what she was doing, but her arm was shaking more now, like she was struggling with something. My mind was racing. What was she pulling out of her pocket? A weapon? A phone? I had no idea, but I was on high alert, ready to bolt if things got weird. And then she pulled it out, a small, crumpled piece of paper. She placed it on the table in front of her, smoothing it out with her shaky hands. I couldn't see what was on it, but she just sat there, staring at it, her breathing heavy and uneven. I was trying to decide if I should get up and leave when she finally turned her head towards me. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot, with dark circles around them. She looked straight at me, and for a moment I felt like I couldn't move, like I was paralyzed by her gaze. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, just this raspy, choking sound. It was like she was trying to say something, but couldn't get the words out. I glanced over at the cashier, hoping he'd notice and come over, but he was gone. I don't know where he went or when he left, but it was just me and this woman now, locked in this silent, terrifying moment. I thought about just getting up and leaving, but something in her eyes stopped me. There was a desperation there, a plea for help, or I don't know what. Then she pushed the piece of paper towards me. I looked down at it, hesitating for a second, before reaching over to take it. My fingers brushed against hers as I grabbed the paper, and they were ice cold. I unfolded the note with trembling hands and looked at what was written. It was just one sentence, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "They are watching us." My heart skipped a beat. What the hell did that mean? I looked up at her, my mind racing, but she was already standing up. She turned and walked towards the exit, her movements slow and deliberate. I wanted to call out to her, ask her what she meant, but my voice was stuck in my throat. I just sat there, frozen, clutching the note in my hand. She pushed open the door and stepped outside, disappearing into the darkness. I stared at the door for a long moment, my mind spinning. What the hell just happened? Who was she talking about? Was this some kind of prank? I didn't know what to think, but I felt this deep, unsettling fear growing inside me. I finally managed to get up and walk over to the counter, looking for the cashier. The place was dead silent now, the kitchen completely empty. It was like everyone had just vanished. I called out, my voice shaky, but there was no answer. I felt this chill run down my spine, and every instinct was telling me to get out of there. I turned and rushed towards the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. As I stepped outside, I looked around, searching for the woman, but she was nowhere to be seen. The parking lot was empty, the street quiet. I hurried to my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine, taking one last look around before speeding off. I drove home in silence, my mind replaying everything that had happened. Who was she talking about? Was someone really watching us? The thought made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Even as I pulled into my driveway and rushed inside my apartment, I locked the door behind me and checked every window, every corner, making sure I was alone. I couldn't sleep that night. Every little noise made me jump. Every shadow made my heart race. I kept thinking about her eyes, the fear in them, the notes she gave me. They are watching us. Who was she talking about? And why did she tell me? Weeks went by, and I tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. I kept the note tucked away in a drawer, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It felt like a warning, a reminder that something was out there, something I couldn't see. Every time I go out now, I feel like someone is watching me. I can't explain it, but it's this constant nagging feeling at the back of my mind. I've even gone back to that fast food place a couple of times, hoping to see the woman again, to ask her what she meant, but she's never there, and the cashier is always different. No one seems to remember that night, like it never even happened. I still don't know what to make of it. Was she crazy? Was I imagining things? I don't know. But one thing's for sure, I'm never going to forget her face, the fear in her eyes, and the words on that note. It haunts me, even now. Every time I walk down the street, sit in a cafe, or even just lie in bed at night, I can't shake the feeling that someone somewhere is watching me. I remember this one night vividly. It was one of those evenings where nothing's really going on, and I was feeling too lazy to cook. So I decided to hit up the local fast food joint. You know the kind, open all night, neon lights flickering outside, the sort of place where you expect to see a few people like you, just looking for a quick bite. It was about 9 p.m. when I headed out. Not too late, but late enough that the streets were mostly empty. The place I was going to was a bit of a dive, but they made the best greasy burgers, and sometimes that's all you need. As I walked there, I noticed how quiet it was. Not many cars, not even the usual group of teenagers hanging around the parking lot. When I got there, the first thing I noticed was the lack of people. Usually, even at that hour, you'd see a few customers or at least someone grabbing a late night snack. But tonight, it was just empty. The only car in the parking lot was this beat-up sedan, and I remember thinking how odd it was. The lights were on inside though, so I pushed the door open and walked in. The moment I stepped inside, I felt this weird chill. You know that feeling when you walk into a place and you just know something's off? That's exactly how it was. The air felt heavy, and it smelled like bleach. Not the usual smell of fries and burgers, just strong, almost overpowering bleach. I glanced around. The place looked almost normal. Tables, chairs, the counter with the register. But then I noticed something weird. There was only one person behind the counter, a guy I hadn't seen there before. He was standing perfectly still, facing away from me, staring at the wall behind the counter. His uniform was neat, but his posture was too stiff, almost unnatural. I cleared my throat, trying to get his attention. He turned around slowly, like he was in slow motion or something. His face was blank, not even a hint of a smile. "What can I get you?" he asked in this flat, almost mechanical voice. It caught me off guard. Usually the staff here was pretty friendly, but this guy looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Just a cheeseburger and fries," I said, trying to keep it casual. He nodded without saying a word and turned around to start my order. The whole time he was working, he never looked up, never made a sound. Just this eerie silence, except for the occasional clatter of utensils. I took a seat near the window, trying to shake off the weird vibe. I pulled out my phone, but the screen felt almost blinding in the dim light of the place. I turned the brightness down and started scrolling, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing up at the guy behind the counter. He was moving so slowly, like he was in a trance or something. Then I noticed something else. There was a door behind the counter, probably leading to the back room or something. It was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint light coming from it. Every now and then, the light would flicker, casting strange shadows on the wall. I don't know why, but I felt this growing sense of unease every time I looked at it. After what felt like forever, the guy finally placed my order on the counter. He didn't call my number or anything, just left it there, and went back to staring at the wall. I got up to grab my food, and as I did, I noticed his hands. They were shaking, just slightly, but enough to make me wonder what the hell was going on. I took my tray back to my seat and started eating, trying to ignore everything else. But it was hard. The fries were cold, the burger tasted off, like it had been sitting out for a while. I forced myself to take a few more bites, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Then the door behind the counter opened. I looked up, expecting to see another employee or something, but there was no one there, just darkness. The guy behind the counter didn't react at all. He just stood there, staring at the wall, his back to the open door. I kept staring at the door, waiting for someone to come out, but nothing happened. After a few minutes, the guy turned around and went into the back room, closing the door behind him. And just like that, I was alone in the place, completely alone. I don't know what made me do it, but I got up and walked over to the counter. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to see what was going on back there. I leaned over the counter, trying to see through the small window in the door. The light was still flickering, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move across it. I quickly pulled back, my heart racing. What the hell was I doing? I should have just left right then and there, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I wanted to know what was back there. I wanted to know why this place felt so damn creepy. So I did the dumbest thing I could have done. I went around the counter and pushed the door open. It was dark inside, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb overhead. I took a step inside, and immediately the smell hit me. It was like a mix of bleach and something rotten, something that made my stomach turn. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The room was small, with shelves lining the walls and a few cardboard boxes on the floor. In the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a mop bucket, but the water inside was a dark, murky red. I stared at it, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I heard it, a soft shuffling sound coming from the shadows at the back of the room. My heart nearly stopped. I turned slowly, my eyes straining to see into the darkness. And then I saw him, the guy from the counter. He was standing there, in the dark, his face pale and expressionless. I froze, not sure what to do. He just stood there, staring at me with those empty eyes. And then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at me, his eyes cold and empty. And then, without warning, he took a step towards me. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to get the hell out of there. I turned and ran, bolting through the door and back into the dining area. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran straight out the front door and into the night. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I glanced back, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me. But there was nothing, just the dark, empty street and the faint glow of the fast food joint's neon sign in the distance. I didn't know what I had just seen, and I didn't want to know. I ran the rest of the way home, locking the door behind me and collapsing onto my couch. I sat there for hours, trying to make sense of it all, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just walked into something I wasn't supposed to see. The next day, I decided to go back. I needed to know if what I saw was real or if I had just imagined it. But when I got there, the place was closed. The windows were boarded up, and there was a sign on the door that said, "Closed for renovations." I asked around, but no one seemed to know anything. The place had just closed overnight without any warning. I never found out what was in that back room or what happened to the guy behind the counter. But every time I pass by that boarded up building, I get this uneasy feeling, like there's something still inside, waiting. and I can't help but wonder if one day it will happen again. Maybe not to me, but to someone else. Someone who walks into a fast food joint late at night, just looking for a quick bite and ends up finding something they were never meant to see.